also fair to say that the fact that we've started talking about immortality before we've even started is just about the level of cardstock. You never know quite where it's going to go. Um, John isn't here, so we're not going to do that ludicrous theme music nonsense that he likes because everybody finds it a bit embarrassing, I think. Um, as much as there is an idea for what we will talk about today, there's a couple of things. In a wee bit, Stephen has volunteered to continue to share what is his continuing adventures into a taxonomy of how cards might be used, which has been fascinating. And I'm looking forward to what the next installment might be. Um, I am I've got some just sort of field notes to share about a random idea I had on the spur of the moment 2 weeks ago in doing some consulting work with a client to bring a mechanic of a popular children's card game into technology consulting. So I'll just talk through what we did. I'm not sure necessarily. Hey, Helen, and hello, Sarah, as well. Available now on Kickstarter. Um, uh, so yeah, we'll talk about that a bit. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to bring to the Cardstock party this week?
I just wanted to say I'm new to the stock party, but
Welcome.
I found you through John Wiltshire, and yeah, so I'm here on a whim, and yeah,
All of
really
us are,
looking forward to
Helen.
it.
All of us are. I think there's a few newbies. I think Cully I know is new. Uh,
Okay.
Zibzek and sorry, who is it that is alongside Zibzek? Who isn't on the screen at the moment? Who's the other person? So I didn't catch your name.
Probably you're mentioning me. It's
Yes.
Patty, Patricia, and Zbyszek's my husband. We are together running educational foundation and also doing cards and game design. So last time
Amazing.
with Bruno Sotola we've met, and with other people on Gamification Global Conference. So we are very,
Amazing.
very happy to join the group because we are really passionate of designing different games, especially based on cards.
Amazing.
And
I
I'm
won't do the
new.
whole thing about everybody talking because otherwise it'll take forever. But oh, Sharon, you're new as well, aren't you?
I'm
Hello.
new. I've been threatening to come, but I've just.
I'm glad you made good on your threat at last. That's good. Um, right. So, shall I talk a bit about this top trumps thing? Which now I'm staring at a bunch of strangers thinking about it. I'm going, God, was it really a good idea or not? I don't know. But I'm going to carry on regardless, and then we can see where we go.
Can I just to talk for
Yeah,
something to fill
Do-
the dead air while
Thank you
Matt
very
keeps
much, Nick.
going? Is just for the new people, just to make the point, as I hope is clear. But as Matt completely knows what he's doing. He's just doing this little role play to fool you. Is how informal this meeting is. So don't think like, oh, I need to make this particularly like LinkedIn style impression on all of us. We're people just interested in professional games, especially card-based games. Which I'll keep going while Matt, just in
Thank
case Matt
you.
starts swearing.
Nick, I had a question for you. What does it mean for something to be LinkedIn level? As somebody who doesn't really use that platform.
Oh, I'm very. What is it? What are the three words? If you're on LinkedIn, you're always humbled, proud, or blessed to be doing something because you've just been incredibly or humbled, of course, because you've just achieved something. And LinkedIn is constantly people putting the best face forward on all their achievements, hiding all their failures, and kind of role playing what they think successful business people look like.
I've got it. So everybody here, so the rule is don't be a boastful, big-headed dickhead who's dead inside.
You have to be a humble, boastful, big-headed dickhead.
Okay, that's fine.
Also, it depends on what you've achieved. If you've done something really good, please do be boastful. Like, it's also one of those communities where you actually realize, oh, that's that person with that name who wrote that book. kind of community. So if you have achieved something, do say so. I was just thinking while Matt's
I'm ready
stuff.
to go. I'm just waiting for you to
Oh
stop
no!
there.
Whoa! Oh, so you interrupt always. Just I don't know if I'm not aware, so I'll ask. How international is top trumps? I'm
I
just
don't
wondering.
know, which is what I'm
But
about to explain
you're
it.
going to explain it. No, then
Yeah.
Matt, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Nick. I was trying to get my clever camera to work, but my clever camera appears to have died, so I'm just going to have to show you on here. So Top Trumps is a card game aimed at mostly children. This is the authoritative version of it, which is the Watford Football Club Top Trumps deck. And this, because this is the best card in the pack, this is just an excuse for me to share my predilection for a very poor football team. But because Luther Blissett is the greatest player who's ever played for Watford Football Club, this is the best Top Trumps card on the planet. That's how it works. The basic idea, if you're not familiar with it, you have a series of categories of thing, and you play the game, you shuffle out the cards, and then you compete with one another on the basis of saying, I don't know, appearances 503, Luther wins every time. And you just play it until eventually you collect all the cards or lose all your cards. 2 weeks ago, I found myself in a workshop with a group of people from a client where we needed to be able to find a way to be able to get them to describe their systems portfolio, the list of the things that they have working in their organization. It's a financial services company. It's a mutual. It's a very nice environment. It doesn't feel like financial services. And the brainwave hit me at 5 a.m, when most of my brainwaves appear to hit, of how we might be able to use the mechanic of a top trumps card as a way of being able to get to explore a domain like what systems have you got, and let's find some stuff out about them. So the first thing that we did was I introduced this idea to them, and I've been using some of John's artifact cards. I'd been using actually an awful lot of John's artifact cards.
And you just summoned him. You just turned up.
I
Bang
know,
on.
it's just the way it's, well, with the amount of cards I'm buying off him at the moment, I should hope so too. That's the latest delivery.
John as a service.
Yeah, it's it. And what we did was we mapped out the systems using those cards. And then what I said was, okay, so we've been using cards so far. How about if we could create a top trumps deck for your systems? And it actually felt like that. And you can apparently top trumps, the manufacturers of them, you can go online and you can get short custom runs of them. So this is something that I actually could do if we were able to complete the journey on this. And I think it'd be a really interesting artifact to leave a client with a set of cards that they can then play games, but also use as part of their discussions about what their systems deck looks like and all the rest of it. So top trumps cards usually have 5 or 6 categories on them. You can see there. And so I said, well, first of all, what we need to do is brainstorm out the categories that we might have for one of these cards, because then we will be in a position where we can understand, what we need to collect. And if we can keep these at a relatively high level, it could be interesting, because what it could allow us to do then is to use that as the start of a conversation, and then we can drill down into detail as we kind of find that we need to do it. So we started brainstorming out, remembering that a top trumps card usually has 5 or 6 things on it. And we ended up with about 20 categories. But that felt like it might be all right. And then we could work out whether they would then turn in. So what we then did was we created these pro formas. I'm sort of editing it a bit so that it's not revealing anything secret, and then use that as a starting point for having the conversation with the teams about the system. So we'd start off by saying, okay, let's talk about the cost or the tech debt or whatever. And you can see this was the first iteration where we didn't really qualify anything, and then by the second iteration we decided that, well, if we put low, medium and high then that helps us to be able to speed that conversation a bit. And then there was this whole thing about, well, does low, medium, and high always mean bad to good, or is it the other way around? Or so there's a bit of conversation then that actually was about the dynamic of the card, but also was helping us to explore about the attributes of these systems. Ian, you've got your hand up.
Can I just get a clarification? When you talk about systems, are you talking about like software systems?
Oh yeah,
or...
IT systems.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
sorry, it should have been clear. Right. Anyway, so there we go. I've developed a new IT management consulting exercise, system process. And at the end of it, I'm going to give our clients, hopefully, a set of card games that they can play in the pub, which feels like a win-win for me. That's as far as it goes. It's nothing clever. Well, it's a little bit clever, but not, brain stretchingly. But it was a really interesting way to be able to keep a sense of fun dynamic in what could have been a really bloody boring workshop session otherwise. Because
I also now want the top trumps of when you say, well, it's not totally clever, it's a little bit clever. You go, oh, there's a top trumps game in its own right.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Matt's ideas as a top trump set.
Oh. What would the categories be, John?
Well, cleverness, obviously.
Yeah, obviously,
really clever to just a little bit clever.
Is there a badge? The answer is probably always yes.
Is there a badge? Yes.
Is there a badge? The speed of deployment.
Interesting. Yeah, I've got much quicker on that in recent years.
Actionability by others. That's a very long title, though.
Oh yeah. So there's a whole ideas top trumps deck there.
Well, you could shorten that name to Mattness. As in sort of like, does it need lots of Matt or very little Matt? What's the Mattness quotient?
That's like an amplifier. That's like a multiplier rather than a straight number. I want to hear Helen's story about top trumps.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so back in the day, I taught design technology to some students, and in year 7, they had to kind of learn about basic workshop skills and tools. So to get them familiar with the tools in the workshop, I got them to build their own top trump cards, and they'd have to rank basically the tools on particular criteria. So it helped them to get to know the particular objects, and the process of them creating the top trump cards helped to engage them with their learning process. So actually, I think what's really nice with the example that you shared, Matt, is that if you, rather than creating top trump cards that fit any company, if you lean into the IKEA effect of people taking ownership and valuing what they build, that could be really nice, where you have a skeleton structure that people could follow, and then they create their own top trump cards using this skeleton shell, so that then they can build what's relevant for their organization. Because I think a lot of the times, especially if you look at kind of ideation method cards and things like that, they're very generic methods that people can apply, but they're most powerful when they are specific to the organization. And so this example with the kids, they all built their top trump cards, and I was the independent reviewer as their teacher, so there was some limitation to it. But at the end of the kind of the term, at the end, they all sat down and they played top trumps with each other and each other's cards. So we had a whole set which the groups in the class would all play with, and I think it was really nice that they had a sense of achievement and pride over the ones that they'd created. And they also all had sketches of their tools, things like that. So we tried to make it as visual as possible. So that's my little example.
That's fab. It also reminds me a bit. So I'm sure I've talked about this a wee bit before.
Yes.
This is something that Simon White, occasionally of this parish, and I created for a client about 10 years ago. We had this idea: could we make an idea fruit machine? And it was doing some work for it was consulting to a consulting firm. We wanted to create new data products, and I built this thing out of cardboard, which gave me immense pleasure. And this article, which I'll share the link for, it gives you full instructions on how to, you've got the full history of how we went about building it and prototyping and everything. And there's also now a digital version of it, which isn't as fun, but does the same thing. But the reason for showing this is the idea of being able to allow people to create the stuff that went into the categories and then spin the wheels to come out with seeds for ideas. The thing that made this powerful, they owned all of it.
Yeah.
And that idea of giving power to people to create the context in which they're then going to use the tool is super, super powerful.
Is this so? I love the idea, and it seems like and I think maybe the same with what you were talking about. The process of making the cards is the value, right? I mean, it's the discussion, and for you, Helen, your students having to think in kind of structured ways about the characteristics of each machine. So it's something you probably repeat every year, right? With each new student, you wouldn't hand cards. As with all things, the artifact is kind of the irrelevant bit. It's the process of making it.
It's the process.
Absolutely. I love it. Did you give them any guidance about characteristics, or did they come up with them? Did they have like likelihood of cutting off your finger as one of them?
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
Yeah. So there was I think it was, I can't quite remember, but there was like a safety element, there was a power element, energy, so lots of different things in terms of what that was. So they all had the same metrics to work under. And then when they played the top trumps, we sort of said they'd have to put down a scenario, essentially. And then would play the top trumps against that. So what would be better as well in that scenario? So there were two ways that you could use the top trump card. You would play it against a particular metric, as you do with top trumps. But the other thing was that you could present a scenario and then choose which tool would be best for that scenario as well. So, and that's something that I've done. That second example is something that I did with some fellow teachers on a creativity for innovation course. So we give them 10 objects, random objects, and they're given a scenario and they have to choose 3 objects to be able to get themselves safely out of the scenario. So the example this week was what three objects would you bring with you to a situation where your cat has escaped into a fish factory, which is completely bizarre, but one of and the objects were things like a hammer, a bit of string, and one group rather ingeniously said that they take the hammer, cut it in half to make ham, which they would put on a string and attach to something and entice the cat out of the factory. So it's really interesting, but I think I've spoken enough. I think John has his hand
that's
up.
brilliant, Helen. Thank you.
No, I just want to ask Helen something. So when you do that, is it if I get this right, the sort of like you play the game repeatedly and the scenario changes, but the 10 objects stay the same?
Yes, yeah.
And so over time, so this is just something I've seen in other card games, but I think it must work as objects as well, or maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
But essentially, sort of like if you play a game like that with a consistent group of people, the hammer, as the example retains all of the characteristics of all of the way it's used in previous rounds. So therefore, etc. So I'm thinking of things like when you play a game of like anything like Apples to Apples or Cards Against Humanity, etc. The card, when it comes up again, has actually got the social material affixed to it in the round after it, so that you go, oh yeah, well we know jetpacks do this now, and so therefore this is how we deploy jetpacks. Or we know that the hammer is made of ham, and you can split it in made of ham. So I'm going to use the ham from the ham now again and do this and so on. Do you see those stories persisting through the objects?
Yeah, so you see a couple of uses, and what was really interesting is when the teams would share back what they would do, and so that would just layer. So as you said, the object gains meaning, but also the shared ideas actually gain increased creativity, and it promotes that element of teams wanting to level up and be a bit more creative and challenge themselves into, okay, this team turned hammer into ham. What can we do?
Yeah.
It also then takes the whole thing off in a different dimension, because then every word can then be split up into its syllables, and then every other object suddenly gets a new power. That's a beautiful dynamic.
Yeah.
I really like
it came about because of my colleague. His dad gave him a riddle of saying, you've woken up in a bricked building in the middle of the desert. There's a bed and a painting on the wall. How do you get out?
My gran used to give me this one as well. Yes.
Would you like to share the answer?
Well,
can you remember?
The one we had was he rubbed his hands till he was sore. He used the saw to cut the bed in half. Two halves make a hole. He climbed out of the hole, shouted until he was hoarse, jumped on the horse and rode away.
Yeah. And it was just a great way to get people thinking a bit differently. And it was almost like, I think it's almost a kind of warm up that you could combine with the top trumps as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I'm also interested in the idea if you each week you weren't allowed to use the things you'd used last week.
Yes, yeah. That would be great.
Kind of the constraint then forces people into having to get more and more innovative as they go.
Yeah.
That's a bit like this is probably one for Stephen. In the game Root, you have all of the kind of little tools that the characters can have, but then you spend them. Like you use them once and you can now no longer use them. And so they go to a different part of the board and sort of like, oh, this is now a spent item. You have used this thing. You can refresh it, but that takes another sort of thing. But yeah, you have spent your hammer. You turned it into ham, you fool. Now it's a nail challenge.
Yes, yeah. And naturally, what we could have done is say once you've used your object, you can't use it again. So that would put priority on some objects. One of the kind of activities which I thought, which I'd like to try kind of next time, is based on this is pretty horrific, but on TikTok. My goddaughters, they were watching these TikToks of people rating who they found most attractive out of 10, but they didn't know the person until they were told, and they had to position them 1 to 10. So it'd be quite interesting to position usefulness of objects or people's perceptions of objects before you give them the context. So Matt, when you were talking about I think you were saying, about effectiveness or time or those kind of elements, how do people rate them before they're given context, and then how do people rate them after they're given context, and does that change the order?
Game setting, you could just literally go, right, here are these objects, just pack yourself a rucksack, take on your adventure without telling them what the adventure is.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah.
And I think the young people today are so used to building inventory. Like my son spends his life building his loadouts in various different video games. So I think they'd be really well adapted to that kind of thing.
Yeah. There was that management training game as well, wasn't there, from probably 20, 30 years ago, which was the scenario was you, I don't know, crash landed in the desert and you had a list of 10 objects and you had to rank them in terms of the priority. and you'd use it to be able to observe team behaviors and who would dominate and who wouldn't, um, and whenever I ran it, which I ran it a few times, it was a hooky copy, if I remember correctly. I don't think we actually had the licensed version. And
Did the non-licensed version, was it a bit like worse? Was it kind of like, oh, your bus is broken down on the A24? You found these 10 things down the back of seats.
Yes, and it's mostly chewing gum. But you'd always have somebody who had done the exercise before. And the really interesting thing would be whether that person would be listened to within the group. And sometimes they'd just completely defer. I've done this before. This is the order. And they just go, right. Sometimes I've done this before and they'd be completely ignored. And they're all about dynamics. There's a lot there about, relative positions in teams, structure and hierarchy of the organizations. They came from a whole bunch of stuff. And you used to get so many interesting observations about how teams operated through getting people to play that kind of game.
And if you were being really nasty, that person could be a stooge.
Yeah. I know what to do. Put salt first. No, don't put salt first. Don't do it.
Maybe that's the thing. Maybe that was the reason that people didn't listen to them, because they thought they might be a stooge. I had similar things when I've been doing stuff with people with Lego exercises. So if someone's done something like that before, if I can, then I say, if you've seen this before. Actually, there was one I used to do with cards, and the Agile Manifesto points, but I wouldn't tell them what they were. I'd just hand them out and say, can you put these in order of how useful they are? None of them are not useful, but put them in some kind of order. And I'd say, if you recognize what it is, please don't tell anyone. But it was so rare that anyone would recognize it.
It makes me think of Mousetrap, the stage show, Agatha Christie. Has
Everybody
anyone
sworn to secrecy?
I thought you meant the really disappointing game for a minute there.
Tell us who did it, Helen.
Yeah. I can't do it. I'm sworn to secrecy. But I did figure it out and I was very pleased with myself before it was shown at the end. But I think there's also, that what's interesting about Mousetrap, the stage production written by Agatha Christie, just to clarify, if anyone wasn't aware of the context.
Not the board game.
Not the board game, no.
But actually written by Agatha Christie's nephew.
Oh, yeah.
No, that was a lie. No. Sorry. I couldn't resist.
So what's interesting about that is that, I think it's one of the longest running plays.
Yeah.
And everyone keeps it silent because they're part of that. I think it feels quite a privilege, or there's a bit of camaraderie around having that secret. And so when it comes to cards and maintaining a secret, I think maybe that uniqueness of building your own top trump cards has that, oh, okay, well, we've got our top trumps, but they might be different to your top trumps, but ours are top secret. So, there's that element, not just of the IKEA effect, but, making something feel like it's a real shiny penny.
Right. Should we segue clumsily into the continuing adventures of Stephen Anderson in Card World, as I'm now calling it?
Yeah, before we do,
can I just interrupt first?
Yeah, of course.
I invited somebody along today, and he's sitting here. I don't know if he's had a chance to introduce himself yet, but I think it's quite nice as we probably most of us know each other. So it's Blajek. He's gone off camera now. I hope he hasn't gone off.
We have done some intros.
Oh, he's on it. Okay.
Yeah. No, we have done.
Okay, that's all right then. I wasn't sure because I was in without audio at the beginning and I didn't.
Yes, no, we've got a few newbies, and
I will. I'll interrupt them. Sorry, Steve. You carry on.
No. Sarah? While you're speaking, do you want to share your Kickstarter with the rest of the group?
Oh, you're on mute.
I'll do that very, very briefly. I launched a Kickstarter yesterday. I think it was only yesterday, in fact, or the day before. And very surprisingly, it got 99.5% funded in 24 hours. I couldn't quite do the fully funded in 1 day sticker, but actually 99.5% in 1 day is a bit funnier to stick on as a sticker anyway. So I'll drop it in the chat. I won't say any more. I'm barreling towards my second stretch goal at the moment. 23 quid short of that at the minute. So that's my next stop. It's an RPG based in the Museum of Impossible Objects, which some of you may have heard of before with my previous thing.
And by RPG, you don't mean rocket propelled grenade?
No, I mean
Okay,
role-playing game.
I'm surprised that comment didn't come from Nick.
Yeah.
I have something to share, and then something I'd love us to jam on. Thing I'd love us to jam on is cards that use a hexagon shape. I think in the past we talked about shapes and all, and sizes. That was a big topic. But for the next issue of Thinking Things on March 9th, I'm doing a themed issue specifically about learning games, serious games that use the hexagon shape. And I'm finding that there's no shortage of board games, card games in the formal game world, like thousands, right? But when it comes to learning games, I've found 7 so far. One of them was a student project. And then, yeah. So I would love to hear thoughts on examples and then strengths, weaknesses, pros, cons before we shift to that. So that's the teaser, and you can get some ideas simmering. I just wanted to give you an update on the pattern we talked about last year, which was sequence. And let me share my screen. I'm going to share my entire desktop, which may be scary, but forgive me. Where did it go? All right. Oh, and I had this up. This was going back to the Trump cards. This is something, Nick, you had shared about 3 or 4 months ago. It was someone who's taking Magic the Gathering cards and creating versions of them for, what was it? I don't know. Do you want to come off mute and tell us what this was?
No, because I don't remember what I've said as soon as I've said it, whereas you lot remember things sort of months afterwards, which is slightly frightening. I think it was, if I remember rightly, it was some kind of sort of workshop-based exercise, and I think the conversation quickly got to the copyright around Magic the Gathering, and is that Wizards of the Coast as well, or is that someone else? The way the owners of it treat copyright is interesting. So I think it was something that was going to be published, but then wasn't, because they thought it all might get very legally interesting really quickly.
Yeah, and I think it was all like naming, articulating government problems, like as a cathartic exercise. Wasn't that the
yes? And
premise?
especially it was interesting just having squinted at the page you're showing, in that people put together cards but didn't include identifying information. So it was kind of okay under the Chatham House rule in that you could see what there was without revealing too much about who you were or your opinion of a particular aspect of, I think it was sort of American government processes and security concerns as well. And also, I mean, this especially, like, I think it was it Helen said earlier, the IKEA effect. There's something about putting the cards together yourself that not only invests you in it more, but there's something to the process of doing that, of making the decision of what these cards are and what you say is part of the thinking process. As with for me, an awful lot of facilitation methods and general meeting sort of organization methods, the process of doing it is at least as important as the finished product.
Mm-hmm. Good comment. All right. I had that up. Just wanted to share that. So on the sequence, what I'd like to do is just catch you up on my thinking, put this in the chat. If you have thoughts and would like to give me feedback, I'll drop my email address as well for those of you who don't have it. But rolling back last year, we talked about cards that use sequence, and we had things like, where you form words using the cards that have letters on them. Or this is one from a Japanese game, a game to learn Japanese, where you have parts of the grammar, right, that you can learn, and you can mix and match cards. So we had all different cards like that. Some that were story cards that would come together to form a particular narrative. What I was left with was struggling with was kind of a good structure to think about these. And I think I'd thrown out these terms: categorical, explicit, structural. They never felt right. And so last week I went off the deep end and started diving into all sorts of fields and domains. And I arrived out, or came out the other end with this uh, sort of taxonomy, I guess, of ways to talk about ways to sequence a card. And very quickly, I'll go over these because, again, this is a share, and then async feedback would be appreciated. There's ordered, which are things like numerical, chronological, alphabetical, consecutive. So there's a right and wrong way to order these things. Grammatical, where it's more about a system or a pattern, and that could be going down to phrases or individual letters or things like that. So it's not like there's a right or a wrong, but there's a system there, a grammatical system. Modular is similar, but a little bit different. It's rules based, and there's, this can come before this, but this has to come after that, sorts of things. Things snap together in a certain way. So a little bit different from grammatical. And then finally, external, where the sequence isn't on the cards or isn't suggested on the cards themselves. It's suggested by some external artifact, like a book or rules that or recipes that things like that. So that is how I'm thinking about. That's an update on something we brainstormed last year. I will drop this into the chat in a moment. But I see Helen, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't. This was probably showing my age, but does anyone remember the game Blockbuster?
The TV thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was hexagon. Was it hexagons?
They were stretched hexagons.
Yeah. 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 So, Stephen, I don't know if you're familiar, and essentially you had a grid and there were hexagons, and you had to answer specific questions to try and join up all your hexagons. You would have to try and join up so that you would go from one side to the other through the contact of each side. So it just depends which way you would go. But it just really reminded me of that in terms of trying to create path using different hexagons. And you could only create that path if you got the question right or something. It was quite a while ago, so I can't quite remember the details. But yes, can I have a pee, please, Bob? There's a lot of quite funny phrases that came out of that. So yeah, it might be worth looking it into as a bit of inspiration, but I can't quite remember the details if anyone else can.
Yeah, I'm just bringing up something.
I found a picture of them I can share. I want to.
Yeah.
I do want to share one other thing which is true this time. Bob Holness, who hosted Blockbusters,
I know what you're going to say,
was, I believe, the first person to play James Bond in any media.
Wow.
He played him on a radio play on the 60s BBC.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, was it South African radio? Thank you, Alistair.
I'm lost for words.
Which does not happen often.
No.
I am having problems putting that image into the chat, so I'll figure that out later. But anyway, I just wanted to catch up on that. That actually, Blockbuster is a great segue to hexagons. And I teed that up a moment ago. I'd love to hear, I guess, two things: examples of hexagon-based games. And I will share my screen once more just to give you a preview of the roundup I've got so far. So this is the Hexi kits from the Kinevin group. I just wrote a very long post on Medium on these, the What's Worth Doing card deck. It's about 1/3 about the card deck and 2/3 about embodied cognition. So, and I can drop that in the chat. This is one that this is the Zenith Purpose Anatomy, and I think there are cards within these 7 stacks, if you will, or 6, and you can swap them out, but they all form a cohesive whole. This is the Serious Games Idea deck. There's only one hexagon card, but all the regular shaped rectangle cards pivot off of it. And then from the education space, here's teaching walkthroughs, and there's, 100 like things you can do as a teacher to structure your activities or create engagement, things like that. And then challenge opportunity cards was believe a student or college project that I found, university project. And then the TDD game as well. So, and this I'm going to call out my friend Per Axbaum. He did this poster in 2021, and I told him he needs to turn it into a card game. And in light of the post I just wrote about this, I think that conversation resurfaced. So I'm going to be like, this is begging to be a hexagon-based card game. Make it so. So that's a bit of priming. But as I'm collecting examples, that's the first thing. I'm also just thinking about the patterns or the uses. And I know, Nick, you said you might have some spicy things to say about hexagon-shaped cards. So I will stop and leave it there.
I was just gonna. I think John just gave me a drum roll, but I assume you mean hexes as cards, not hexes as No, I mean just in war games or traditionally things like SPI games and so on will hex based for rather than using squares. And to me, they just don't work. Like, because literally you can't move sideways or you can't move forwards and backwards. It's very much like going from squares don't work because diagonals are kind of worth more as far as your piece moves. But hexagons just give you a different set of problems. To me, there's better ways of fixing that. Is why I'm very hexagons is always in that context isn't an answer, but is kind of what everybody does, so no one questions it. It's like you don't get fired for by an IBM of game design. But I don't know, for cards it's interesting, but sometimes it feels like it's a format chosen so that you can justify the expense of the cards, because they're harder to make and people can't make their own or add to their own deck without buying the specific hex shaped cards, for example, rather than just grabbing any rectangular card and using that.
Right. So I there's this bloke who sells these things, right? And
oh wow,
make things people want, huh?
Just before you go any further, I've changed that recently. It's now make things Matt wants rather than make Matt want things.
Well, make Matt want things, yeah. But anyway, I bought these ages ago, and I was going through it because I'd never really worked out how to use them, and then I realised that I actually did create a prototype thing, which I don't know why my desk camera's stopped working. It needs a good kick, but I'll let me just share a photo I've taken of it. And one of the reasons why this is problematic is because I've got a card deck of 6 cards. And that's not enough cards to have a card deck. You need more cards than that. But the dynamic of how this prototype might work, I think is interesting, and I'm going to revisit because I'd completely forgotten I did this. This was a card deck that I had created for a client, which had normal cards, and there were 6 dimensions, and then there was 6 cards for each of the dimensions. And so what I did was to be able to shift it so that you had just one card with the 6 cards on it. So you can see, I don't know which one's the right way up, but connected products, wearable, smart speaker, robot, heat sensor, camera, and RFID tag. And so the thing that I was playing with these was it a bit like dominoes. Could you use these as a way to be able to have spur of ideas for innovation thinking kind of thing? So a camera with a distributed ledger and a microservices and freemium and crowdfunding and you could almost use it as a iterative yes and kind of game. And can you get yourself from one side of the things, randomly lay them down, turn them over so you can't see them, turn them over, and then can you do a bit actually like your blockbusters? Can you get from one side to the other by coming up with an idea that will thread you from one card to the next, to the next, to the next? Sharon and Helen, I think Sharon, your hand up first.
So I was going to say that I did a session with a guy called Ron Donald. I don't know if anybody knows Ron. So Ron used to work with Dave Snowden at Natural England, and so actually it's a version of the first one, the Hex game, because that's a fairly recent thing. But what I loved about that was that he got his wife to cut the hexes out, and they were a bit blockbustery lozenge shape. But I found, and I made him very happy by doing this, that if you go onto Etsy, you can buy hexes that people make or whatever for quilting. So he's very, very happy about that. But as I say, there's a proper version of that now. But it was very much the same thing. It was problem solving and whatnot. And I liked the way that you could get all the different things around the individual. I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, tessellation thing is really interesting with them. Helen.
Yeah, so putting a futures lens on this, because I have a interest in kind of how you gamify the future so that it's more digestible for people, because a lot of people struggle to get past what they know in the present to stretch their imagination to the future. And those hexagons just made me think, imagine if the center of a hexagon was a particular subject matter, and then you had 6 different signals, and then you could match signals up. So if one signal was on one flat edge and another signal was on another flat edge, where joined, you'd have a signal collision, and then you could then generate ideas around that. So actually, you could maybe have different ones. So it could be technical, it could be social, it could be financial. 6 signals are related around each of those, and then you create these signal collisions by rotating the hexagons. I think, yeah, it's just made me think of
really
doing something like that in terms of not necessarily a game, but a game of sorts, but gamifying ideation and using it as prompts. John, did you just put your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Because you and I have come to kind of like it's made us both think the same thing. I think let's see if my desk cam works. Hang on. Share. Setting camera. Okay, hang on. Hold that thought. Okay, yeah. So basically, I was doing it with a kind of like regenerative.
Yeah.
So the economic and the social and the environmental, and you have to sort of like take an economic thing and you go, I've got to make that work with this, work with this. But if that doesn't work, maybe I can twist this one round. But then you get an interesting thing of sort of like, well, if I add multiple cards, going, oh, I've solved this one. But I've caused myself a problem here. And if you have kind of like a map of them going on, you just go, right, am I happy with this? It becomes a systemic version of the world.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is I've done the basic version. So this is like, when you were talking, I was like, oh, this means I could do this. And so yeah, I don't unfortunately have any artifact cards on me, so no.
I think you might be able to solve that problem quite quickly, actually.
Yeah.
It's interesting you though, John, putting them on the corner rather than on, because on my one I put them on the side. So you're matching pairs, whereas you got trios of stuff. And
that's why, because you were going, oh, you match pairs. I'm like, no, trios, because then trios it gives me, and this is the thing that I think is harder with the regenerative stuff, which is sort of like you have to keep in mind the kind of like the economic and the social and the environmental altogether. So the triads of that the hexagons generate is really interesting.
Very interesting.
Matt, I was thinking about, you shared something in the Signal group. It was the cards that were rotating. They were 2-dimensional. And
that was the Eames, I think.
No. But this is before that. It was a concept you had where every card was like a pairing, and you could rotate those.
These ones.
Yeah, you want to show that really quickly. And then the thought I had was where that commits to these pairings. What if you had an idea that had 3, right? Or 5 or 6? And so a hexagon might allow you to rotate among, 6, obviously, or maybe in half, like 3, like proper orientations. So whatever's facing up is the option.
So the idea of these are polarities. So fragile or robust. And the idea playing around with this is if you think of that on a pivot, you can have a discussion with somebody and say, okay, so again, think about it in say IT systems. Is your IT system robust? Is it fragile? Or is it a bit of both? And how much of both? And so that being able to take a two-dimensional card and allow it to pivot in 3D to be able to have conversations. And this has been on the back burner for a few weeks. I had this idea with a colleague of mine, Sabrina, and I quickly, as I do, did a little prototype of it. I then the next day was able to talk with a CIO that I know, and I just sat in a cafe in Kingston and we played with it. And it seemed to be a way. I mean, many of the things I do, they're basically how do you get people to have a conversation? And as a way of having a conversation, is it fragile or robust? Is it complex or simple? Is it more complex than it is simple? Is it 50-50? Is it 100%? Is it 100%? It's just again a dynamic on a tabletop is really interesting. Liesl.
Hi, thinking about all this interesting hexagonal conversation, I bring it down to something I often think about, which is of what use is this as a sailor or a map reader or a navigator? Because sailing is one of my things, and it's an ancient, it's an ancient activity. And I was thinking about hexagons and how they fit into that world, and we don't use hexagons on the boat. There's no hexagonal shaped sail. It affords you nothing in terms of wind. You either have Bermuda shapes, triangular shapes, square shapes, gaff shapes, but none of them are hexagons. However, and hexagons are also not used in traditional maps, but they are used on GPS. So when you're sailing using technology, of which I only mildly approve because I love a nice chart and a lovely set of dividers. You know me, stationary mad, even on boats. But hexagons are fabulous for showing depth on digital maps that right angles don't give you. So if you're at sea and you're looking to find points from which to articulate where you are, if you look in on digital maps, you'll often find hexagons to show dips and rises or caves if you're sailing along somewhere, because hexagons allow you to provide a three-dimensional viewpoint. And I just think that's interesting. When we think about the human brain looking down on hexagonal cards, we're thinking of them as two-dimensional, and they actually have a potential role to play in our minds in a three-dimensional space.
There's also that we were in Lisbon for a short break last week, and beautiful tiles everywhere, and tiles that are hexagons that have got three colors that make them look like three-dimensional cubes. The other thing that springs to mind for me out of that is also those maps to be able to show geography and political representation, where a geographic map of the UK looks very skewed if you colour it in terms of the parties who have the seats, because large tracts of countryside are Conservative and tiny amounts of inner city land are Labour, and so it looks like blue is everywhere, even today.
I put a link in the thing to Open Innovation's Hex Maps.
Oh, Hex Maps, brilliant.
Which is that. Yeah, it's that exactly.
Yeah. Very explore things, these hexagons, aren't they? It's 5 o'clock UK. Other times are available. For people here for the first time, that's pretty good an indication of what you should expect from Cardstock. And you should never expect anything, but it's usually good fun.
I feel like we're just getting.
I know.
Just to say, I'm amazed to see that there are so many people playing with cards up to the limits, stretching the limits and exploring more opportunities. And like questions about, what are the design qualities of hexagon cards to compare to square or rectangular cards, like without actually choosing a game for it, but like in abstract mode, I definitely love it. So I want to join. I want to hear you more. I use cards a lot, and this is like pure inspiration for me. I didn't. A lot of words were new for me, so I didn't interact during the call. But this is amazing, guys.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. No, this is one of my favorite parts of the month.